All right, everybody. We are looking at Ruth chapter 2 now. Can you guys tell me what you talked about? What did you guys talk about in the last session, guys and girls? It just happened. Yeah. Boaz and his godly characteristics about him. All right. Well, we're going to be talking about some of that. Yeah. What do the girls talk about? Okay. Well, then you guys should be able to be ready to talk about a lot of how we see this in Ruth chapter 2. Remember that in Ruth chapter 1, Naomi and Ruth are headed back to the house of bread, and it's the barley harvest, and now Ruth is going to be taking care of Naomi by working in the fields, and we'll see some things about that as we go through this. In chapter 1, just as a review, we said some things about what friendship is made up of. And now in chapter 2 and 3, at this point in the book, Boaz is ruthless. You get the joke? Isn't that pretty good? Because he's not married to her yet. But then he'll become not ruthless because he'll marry her in chapter 4. I thought that was funnier than you guys thought. But in chapters 2 and 3, we see this growing interest or things that the book will say about their character qualities. And so how we're going to look at this chapter is in verses 1 through 7. Ruth is gleaning in the field. And then in 8 through 17, Boaz is going to show her kindness. And then the chapter is going to end with Naomi expressing some joy, showing that to an extent her bitterness from chapter 1 is beginning to evaporate. So that's going to be the way that we look at this chapter. Let's begin in chapter 3. Or 2, and we'll look at verses 1 through 4 just to get started here. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him, in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." All right. What is it that Ruth is doing here? You see that there's people that are gleaning. Have any of you worked on a farm before? Anybody done farm work? You're taking, I guess you'd use electronic equipment now, but you imagine these people with these machetes, and they keep breaking down these things of barley, and they're taking them and maybe put them in wagons or something like that. And as some of it falls on the ground, that's what Ruth would be taking. And the old law allowed this in Leviticus 23, verse 22. "And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, nor shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God." So this was part of God's social welfare kind of program, if you will. Have you ever seen homeless people go to trash cans, and what is it that they take from them to go recycle? Have you guys ever seen this before? People take aluminum cans. And they when I lived in San Diego, if you were homeless, that's the place to be homeless because it's perfect weather all the time. And so you'd always see people around trash cans taking out aluminum cans and putting it in their own bag, and then they would go take it to places to recycle, and then they would get money for it. So imagine something kind of like that. And so here she is working hard in the field. Why is she doing all of this? What was that? For Naomi. She's providing for her friend, for her mother-in-law. And notice that in what verse is it? Verse 3, that she just happened to come to the field of Boaz. And this man is described in this passage as a worthy man. We already talked about that before. I think that this means more than just how wealthy he is, because of how much this book is going to talk about his godly character. But he's a relative of Elimelech. Now, who was Elimelech? Naomi's husband. So he's part of the family, which means that biblically he's got some ability and responsibility to try to help out Ruth and Naomi in their situation. And we'll say more about what that would mean in a little bit. But look at verse 3 again. When it says, she set out and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. So the reapers are grabbing the big amount of stock. She's taking and getting the leftovers. And it says, she happened to come. Now, when she goes out here, has Naomi said, all right, Ruth, I want you to go find the field of Boaz because he's a worthy man. Has she had that conversation? No. So she just happens to come to this place. It's almost like the writer of the book of Ruth is winking at us. Like, yeah, she just happened to come to the right place. God is weaving the life of this woman together with this worthy man, and he's going to make these things work together. Now, we'll see more about that as we go through this. But just initially, what godly character qualities do you see about Boaz? Yeah, he's a worthy man, good character. What about in verse 4? What's he doing? Yeah, so he's openly talking about the Lord. And remember, what days is this book taking place in? The days of the judges. All right, now, since we're talking a little bit about romantic relationships and stuff, all right, guys, if you listen to people like Andrew Tate or other people that'll tell you, I don't know, some of you have never even heard of him, that's good. What would the world say are the kinds of things you should pursue and have in order to be attractive? Yeah, money. What else? Power. Fame. Like a really nice car and all that kind of. And so what this text is showing us is that Boaz was the kind of guy that he had good character and he was somebody who talked about the Lord. Do you want to know why it was that my wife was initially attracted to me? It's because I was talking about biblical things. And if you're that kind of person, you might attract somebody that's interested in those kinds of things. But keep going in this text and look at verses 5 through 7. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers.' So she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest." All right. When Boaz comes, what's the question that he asks his foreman about her? It's not just who is she, and your version might say who is she, but what word is used there? Whose is she? Now, whose woman? Whose young? What is the question that he's asking then? What was that? Yeah, who's her father? In this culture, if you were a woman and you weren't married yet, who had responsibility to care for you? Your father. If you were married, who had responsibility to care for you? Your husband. And so he's saying, okay, like this is a very poor woman, obviously, and she's gleaning in the field. Who has responsibility to help this woman? And what's the answer to that, by the way? Nobody. This woman's got nobody to take care for her, to provide for her the things that she needs. And so think about this question here. In this passage, what godly character qualities do you see about Boaz? Yeah, he's caring. What else? He's concerned for other people's well-being, which, by the way, in the days of the judges, do you think that would be harder and harder to come by? How many of you are worried about what's going to happen when the election happens, November 5th or whatever it is? Do you think that there's more and more people worried about social unrest and everybody doing what's right in their own eyes? You know what Matthew chapter 24 says about when lawlessness increases, the love of many will grow cold? You ever noticed that verse before? Do you think that in the days of the judges, it would be easy to be a guy like Boaz that would roll up in his chariot or whatever he had, greet somebody in the name of the Lord, and then also show proactive concern for, I've never seen this person before, who belongs to her? Who is it that has a responsibility to care for her and to help her? This guy's got a job in the days of the judges. By the way, we'll say more about this when we get to chapter 4, but before Adam ever got married, what did he have before he was married? A job in the Garden of Eden. Tend and work. So here's Boaz. He's got a job. He's got people that work under him. He's somebody who cares about helping these people. And then his foreman accurately represents what it was that was happening with Ruth. Well, she's had a short little rest, but this is what's happened with her. And so in all of this, what godly qualities do you see about Ruth? Yeah, she's not lazy. What else? Yeah, she's dedicating to helping her mother-in-law. She's taking initiative to do all of this. Have any of you ever had a garden? Okay, some of you have. A lot of you have, I guess. What happens to a garden? So my wife and I, we just built a house on 5 acres, and we haven't started a garden yet. But I'll tell you the craziest thing that happened. In the first few months that we lived there, there was this patch that had nothing in it, and then after a couple months, we did nothing to it. But there's perfect blueberry bushes, and there's like a little apple tree that's already sprouting apples and stuff like that. Do any of you believe that? No, that didn't happen. The only kind of thing that grows when you're not showing intention are weeds. If you're not intentional about serving, about not being lazy, about being dedicated as a friend, if you're not trying to figure out and ask questions like, how can I do this more effectively? Who can I ask that knows more about these things to help me grow? If you're not showing intentionality, the only thing that's going to grow on accident is laziness and not the fruit of the Spirit. All right, so that's Ruth. She's gleaning in the field. There's going to be more things that we're going to say about her character and his character as well. But anybody else wants to say through verse 7? All right, let's keep going. And we're going to see Boaz offering protection for Ruth. And so I'm going to read verses 8 through 13, and these are going to be the 2 questions that we're going to ask. What worthy qualities do you see in Boaz, and what worthy qualities do you see in Ruth? So after I read this text, those are going to be the 2 questions I want us to think about. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants." All right, so this is the first interaction that they are recorded to have with one another. What worthy qualities do you see in Boaz here? Okay, he's protective. Now, in what way is he protecting her in this passage? Yeah, don't touch her. By the way, again, what days is this taking place in? Judges? Do you think that that's a legitimate thing that Boaz would have to say? All right, let me ask this question. Why is it that women are attracted to muscles? Is it because they're really vain? Is that why? What do muscles represent? I can protect you. Now, if you're a guy and you don't have big muscles, all you have to do is learn how to use a gun or a baseball bat, and you're fine. But women are more vulnerable and physically weaker. Now, is that offensive for me to say that? Does everybody agree that generally speaking, women are physically weaker than men? Is anybody offended by that? Why are there male and female sports? Does any of that mean that men are better than women? No, but God has designed it so that men are protectors of women. What are some ways that men may not protect women? And would the protection involve physical protection and emotional protection as you're working towards possibly being married and things one day? All right, what else do you guys see about worthy qualities between the two? Hospitality, yes. Good. What else? Yeah, like what kinds of things is he doing for her or having done for her? Yeah, I'm going to kind of treat you like you're one of my servants in the sense that you get the same privileges that they do. You can have the water if you need to take a break, all of that sort of thing. And so he's thoughtful about the things that she needs. Now, women, how many of you would be attracted to a guy who talks about God's things? He's thoughtful about protecting you, but he's not demeaning towards you. He's thoughtful about protecting you. And look also at verses 11 and 12. What's he doing in verses 11 and 12? Yeah. Okay, so he's saying, like, hey, I want to tell you the good gossip I've heard about you. Like, you've left your family's like the city that you grew up in. You've made these great sacrifices to be here for Naomi, and I'm wishing well for you in verse 12. How many women here would like a guy that is proactively talking about God's things? He's thinking about the things that you need. He says things that build you up. Is there anybody here who wouldn't want that? All right, so you start to see, what is it that makes this guy a worthy guy? Now, is anything said here about how tall he is? Is anything said here about whether or not he drives a Bugatti? Is there anything said here about how big his house is? No. Are all of these things that guys here could choose to do? Can you choose to talk more about God and be a leader in that way? Could you choose to think outside of yourself and about the needs of other people? Can you choose to speak words that are building up and encouraging other people? And look, by the way, in verse 13, when she says, then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, and you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant. That's her testimony of what he's done for her there. You've comforted me. All right, anything else you want to say about Boaz's positive qualities? Remember when I talked to you about the wedding that I went to on Monday? Like all the things that we just saw with Boaz, he's got a job, he works hard, he talks about God's things, he cares about all the... Like that's the kind of guy that got married last Monday. But think about the qualities of Ruth. They might be a little harder to see in this text, but what qualities do you see in Ruth that are worthy? She's humble. How do you see her humility? Yes, good. She's willing to accept the status of a servant, even though it's one with privileges there. What else? Yeah, like you don't see her going, well, Boaz, it took you long enough to get out to your field. You were probably just enjoying whatever you wanted to enjoy in your house or whatever. You're just coming to check out your workers. I've been slaving all day, and it took you 6 hours to notice me. That's not her attitude. Her attitude is, you've been very kind, and I don't deserve any of this. By the way, do you think in verse 11, part of her godly character qualities is her reputation? What is it that people are saying about her? Good things. To what extent does reputation matter? Sure. So do you think sometimes people can slander people's names? Yeah, that can happen. But what if like a bunch of people, like everybody kind of knows, like, yeah, this she's a Moabite, and we don't typically think well of Moabites, but she has exceeded expectations. And so what kinds of things reputationally would you like people to say about you? And I actually want to discuss that question. What kinds of things would you want people to say about you? Yeah, that you're a Christian. What else? Yeah, this person's loyal. What else? What was that? Yeah, you're a hard worker. You're not lazy. What else? They're humble. What are some of the markers of humility? Like we see her bowing down here in thankfulness, but what are some ways that you know if you're humble? You put others before yourself. What else? Yeah, you listen to other people. One of the things that people gave me advice for when I was trying to find, who I was going to marry was watch how she interacts with her dad. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to pay attention to that one. Have you guys heard that advice before? All right, so like when I started dating Samantha, her biological dad, we called him Bio Daddy, he lived like 5 hours north, and so I didn't really ever see him until we got married. But her stepdad, when I started hanging out with Samantha and I wanted to see how she interacted with her dad, I paid attention to that. What is it a projection of on how she treats her father? What if she's like, I hate his rules, and then you're like, okay, I'm gonna marry her because she still seems to really like me. Is that ever going to come back on you? Women, what would you want to know about the guy? How does the guy treat his mom? Is he rude to his mom? Does he think that he always knows better than his mom? Is he at least thankful that she gave him life? Or is he haughty and arrogant towards her? And that might say something about how he's learned how to treat a woman. And so what do you want people to say about you? And it's not just, oh yeah, I just really want, like kind of like a Pharisee, just want people to think highly of me or something like that. Try to actually be that person. And these people are people of substance. He's protecting her, speaking well of her. She's got a good reputation, things like that. Anything you guys want to say through verse 13? Okay, look at verses 14 through 17. And at mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine." So he sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied. And she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her. And also pull out some of the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. All right. So here we've got these provisions that he's giving her. And he invites her over for dinner, and he gives her everything that she needs. And when she's like kind of going back out, he tells his servants, I want you to go ahead and let her take the leftovers from dinner, but glean even among the sheaves. What had she been doing? His main workers were like taking the machetes to the sheaves, and then the leftovers are what she got. He's saying, let her even get some of the stuff that you guys are getting. And by the way, when you guys bundle up some of these things and you put it in the wagon, like maybe just accidentally pull some of them out onto the ground and go, oops, and then you let her take that as well. And she does all of this, and she gets an ephah of barley, 30 to 40 pounds. What else would you say about his worthy qualities here? Yeah, he's gracious towards her. When he thinks about serving her, how many of you are old enough to have had to fill out taxes? Just you? Is that literally right? Okay. All right, you guys won't understand this then, but I'll go ahead and say this. Theoretically, when you have to get old enough to start paying taxes, Do you want to fill out your taxes where you're giving as much to the government as you can because you just really appreciate our government? How are you going to fill out your taxes? To give the least amount legally that you have to. Now, do you think there's some people who look at serving God like that? Do I have to go to this event? Do I have to go to church? Do we have to do this? I'm going to put in the least that I have to give to God. When Boaz is serving Ruth, he's giving beyond what you'd expect. I understand you're in a difficult situation. I'm going to give you everything you need, plus even more. Anything else you guys would say about his worthy qualities here? What would allow Boaz to ever be in the situation where he can give like this? He has to be working. He can't be lazy. What's one of the reasons God wants people to get a job? So that you have something to share with other people. The only way do you think that Boaz could have gotten to where he's at if the only thing he ever did was play video games? I don't think so. He was somebody that was industrious. He was somebody who cared about working hard, and this allowed him to be in a situation to be able to bless other people. Any other comments or questions on what he's doing here? All right, look at this next section then. And look at verses 18 through, let's do 18 through about halfway through verse 20. And she took it up and went into the city. Her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. She also brought out and gave her what food she had left over after being satisfied. And her mother-in-law said to her, "Where did you glean today?" Notice, by the way, up to this point, she has no idea that she's been with Elimelech, or what's his name? Boaz, thanks. "And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, "The man's name with whom I work today is Boaz." And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." All right, try to imagine. I imagine, Naomi on her rocking chair, like maybe on the front porch. And then off in the distance, here comes Ruth, and she's carrying like a giant sack of 40 pounds of barley, and it's a lot of work. And she's like, "Oh man," and she takes maybe some of the leftovers that are in a Tupperware, throws it in the microwave, and starts having some of the leftovers. And she's like, "Hey, by the way, where did you glean today? You've been given a lot of stuff." He said, "Well, there's this guy named Boaz. And you can start to see her kindness coming back to her. You can start to see her bitterness melting away, because look at verse 20 again. And Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Who is Naomi saying has been kind to her? God has been. By what means, though? Through Boaz. I'll tell you, one of the struggles that I've had since becoming a Christian is since God is not tangible, like I can't see God, I can't touch Him, how do I think about God being good to me? And this verse is one of the verses that I think are instructive on this. Where did Boaz ever get the idea that he should be kind? Do you think he was just like a really great guy and came up with some new philosophy that nobody had ever taught before? Where did he get this idea? Yeah, who taught him about God? Like, God has ideas that He teaches and wants us to know about being kind. How often have you thought about a brother or sister in Christ, which is the body of Christ, doing something kind for you and then going, "God has been so good to me"? When was the last time you got a pad of paper out and a pencil or pen and you wrote down all the good things that brethren have done for you? I can't imagine. So I'll just tell you, when I was growing up, I grew up in a family that did not ever try new food. Literally every night, the only thing we did was we grilled steak, which is one of the reasons why I have such an imposing stature. So we had steak, and then my sister would make spaghetti from time to time, and I never liked spaghetti, but and then McDonald's. That's all we had. So when I became a Christian, I had never had a BlackBerry before. I had never had cream cheese before. I'd never had cream before. Never had tried coffee before. And then what happens when I start going to church and there's people that are like, hey, there's a new convert here, and this guy's he looks like he needs a lot of help. I remember the first time I went to church. I was baptized on a Thursday, and then I go to church on Sunday evening. My first job was at a gun club where people shot shotguns and archery and all this kind of stuff. So I had to work that Sunday morning. So that Sunday night I came to church, and I'm a northerner, and northerners just generally assume the worst about other people, if you didn't know that. We just assume that everybody's trying to get something from you. And so I go to church, and people are like, hey, we heard you were baptized, so happy for you. I'm like, yep, yeah, thank you. And then one family came up to me and said, hey, would you want to come over and have dinner with us sometime or lunch with us sometime? And my face looked like this. Yeah, that sounds great. But in my mind, I was thinking, who are you, a bunch of freaks? Why would I ever want to hang out with anybody from church? I'm not going to do that. What is this, a cult or something? I've never heard of people at church hanging out with other people. You know what eventually that started to do to me, though? Is people said, hey, here's a BlackBerry. And I'm like, I've never had one of those before. Here's this. And beyond just sharing, food, let me share my life with you. And it took me a while to realize that these people genuinely loved me. You know what I think for me is the hardest thing to believe in the Bible? It's that God created the world in 6 days. To me, that's pretty easy to actually believe. If you start with a God that created everything, He can make it in 6 days if He wants to. Jonah being swallowed up by a fish, I don't have a problem with that either. If God is the creator, He can do whatever He wants with His creation. The hardest thing for me to believe in the Bible, by far, is that God loves me. Because what we're used to is if people found out all the things that I've ever done or thought, they would certainly not want to be around me. We're used to that with people. But then the Bible teaches that there's a God who knows everything about you and still loves you. That, I think, is the hardest thing to believe in the Bible. And if I understand that, then I'll serve God with all the fervor and zeal that He wants me to do. But one of the ways that I think He uses to teach us that God loves us is the kindness of brethren. Write out the good things that brethren have done for you. Think about it. This is the body of Christ coming to your aid. And Naomi, she had no idea that Ruth was in the field of Boaz, and I love this quote. Life appears as it must have done earlier to Naomi in her bitter experiences as a tangle of unconnected threads. But faith in the gracious providence of God carries with it the certainty that those tangled threads are but a back of a tapestry, the front which spells a message of hope and grace. Have any of you ever done, is it crocheting? Or, yeah, isn't that where one side of it, if you look at one side, it's what is that? And then you turn it around and it's really beautiful. Is that crocheting? No, that's not crocheting. What is the other thing that's like that? Tapestries, but there's another thing. Cross-stitching, thank you. All right, so imagine, okay, so does this look really beautiful? Is this a bunch of weird-looking pieces of string kind of put together? Can you guys tell what that might be, though? Anybody have an idea what that could be? A what? A bird's nest, that's a good one. What else could it be? What? A crown. Okay, good. This is the other side of it. Same thing. You know how often our life feels like it's on this side? This happened to me, and that happened to me, and this person said something that was mean to me, and then my dog died, and then this other thing happened, and I didn't get the grades that I wanted, and it feels like my life is an absolute wreck. And all the while, providentially, what is it that God is stitching together? Something way more beautiful than you can see right now. This is what's going on in the life of Naomi. And she's starting to understand a little bit more that God's hand is at work. In chapter 1, call me bitter. In chapter 2, God is being kind to us. Her heart's starting to melt because she's looking at what people have done and connecting it to God. And all of this, so think about if you become the kind of man that Boaz is, and you become the kind of woman that Ruth is, do you think there's ripple effects where it's not just you're good for each other, but you're good for the extended family and the in-laws and all these other... It's going to have a ripple effect. Now, look at the rest of verse 20 through the end of the chapter. Naomi also said to her, "The man is a close relative of ours, one of our redeemers." And Ruth the Moabite said, "Besides, he said to me, 'You shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest.' And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, 'It is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted.' So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law." All right, we see here that she's able to get stable work. She's going to be able to work until the end of the barley harvest. That's at least a few months that they would be doing all of that. And she finally tells her now, okay, yeah, it's Boaz that's been doing this. And why does it matter so much that it's Boaz? Well, he's a redeemer. And in the Old Testament, redeemers could help family members who were sold into slavery. Redeemers could help when land was sold because of economic hardship. Redeemers could help the family name through levirate marriage. And if you can't track all of that, just understand this. This guy is one of the qualified people by the Old Testament law to uniquely help us in our dire situation. Can you imagine the excitement of Naomi? You know, the book is named Ruth, but in a lot of ways it's the book of Naomi. You've lost your husband. You've lost your 2 children. One of your daughters-in-law has gone back at your request. You've got one daughter-in-law with you. It seems like all the cards are stacked against you. And in this text, she just happened to come to the right field. It's a tapestry. My life has felt terrible. My life has felt awful. And I'm starting to see that God is putting something beautiful together. Now, how often is it in our life, like we talked about in chapter 1, that we've committed idolatry? That we don't have sustenance. We don't have good things to eat or drink. That we kind of are in a famine because we've been listening to the wrong things, because we've been putting our hopes in the wrong things. And despite the bad decisions we've made, what is it that Jesus has still done for us? In Titus 2:14, talking about Jesus who gave himself for us to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify for himself a people for his own possession who are zealous for good works. The same imagery of redemption is used here. That Jesus is the one who came, and he's the one who's the greater Boaz. We were in worse circumstances than Naomi and Ruth. And Jesus came to us to still redeem us from our lawlessness, from all the ways that we've hated him and fought against him. Have you guys ever heard people at the Lord's Supper talk? Maybe give an illustration like this. So Jesus was killed so that we could live. And it's kind of like if you're a group of soldiers and somebody throws a grenade up into your group of soldiers and somebody jumps on the grenade and then takes the grenade for everybody else. Have you ever heard an illustration like that before? You know why that's a terrible illustration? Because in that imagery, the soldiers are all on the same team. What is it that Jesus has done? We were on the opposing side. And he came and he spoke good things to us. And he showered upon us beautiful things like saying that you're loved and redeemed and chosen and blessed and all of these great things. You've been made into a royal priesthood. And he's thoughtful about the needs that we have. And we don't deserve any of that. What is it that Boaz's actions towards Ruth, what is it that it caused her to do? Bow down and go, I don't deserve any of this. Do you have that posture before Jesus? If she did with Boaz, how much more should we have with Jesus Christ? And we could talk about this question for a long time. In what ways has Jesus become our Redeemer? We'll say a little bit more about that in the next section. But let me just share with you this final thing. If you're the kind of person that underlines or circles phrases in the Bible, in verse 3, when it says she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, she happened to come. In my conversion, I just happened to get accepted into the school where I met a Christian. I just happened to get accepted to that school the very last day possible that I could have. And during that first semester, I just happened to start praying that God would teach me wisdom and truth. It's just funniest thing. It just started to happen that way. Second semester, first day, at a secular school, my logic professor, the first question he asks, does anybody know the first verse of the Bible? And I, who had been praying for wisdom and truth for 6 months, went, you know what? Maybe I should start reading Genesis chapter 1 tonight. And I just happened 2 days after that in a speech class that I ended up not ever even needing for my degree to meet a Christian, Andy Cantrell's niece. And I just happened to have to work with her on an assignment, and I started asking her, I just started reading my Bible, do you happen to be a Christian? And she goes, yes, I do happen to be a Christian. And about three months later, because of the things that I happened to be learning in my logic class, I was learning how to understand and read things logically. When she showed me what the Bible said to become a Christian, I just happened to understand it because I happened to be learning all of this in my logic class. You know how much my life was filled with darkness before all of that? Addictions, bad friends, things that were never fulfilling. I thought I could get fulfillment in this and that, and none of it ever worked. But it just so happened that there's a God that weaves lives together and makes things beautiful. This story's not done, though. We're going to keep going in about a half hour after we have some songs. And then a little bit of a break. We're going to finish up with Ruth 3 and 4, but my time for now is done. Thanks for your good attention.